All right, welcome back to World History. We are getting into Unit 7. We're going to be looking at Islamic civilizations and the early medieval Europe. So let's get started. The cradle of Islam was Arabia. And Arabia is a large peninsula that extends south of the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East. So remember, the Fertile Crescent is like where Israel and Jordan and places like that are, Lebanon. But we're in this peninsula, and this peninsula lies between Asia and Africa, and it's bound by the Persian Gulf in the east and the Red Sea in the west. And so in land area, excuse me, it's about one third the size of the United States. But the majority of that land is barren wilderness and deserts and stony plains. And it really hasn't been up until the last 3 years that people have started to develop uh, the empty quarter, as they called it, the desert out there. Um, Vegetation is very sparse here. Agriculture is very limited because of the extreme heat and lack of adequate rainfall. They've had to be very inventive. There's a lot of desalinization that happens for their water supply. So they take water, salty water, and they extract the salt from it so that they can use it. But at this time, in the ancient days, it was a very uninviting environment. And so it kept most of Arabia in relative isolation until the birth of Islam in the 7th century. So the land of Arabia is also adjacent to the biblical lands. Um, so as do the Hebrews and Arabs trace their beginnings back to Abraham, the Hebrews through his son Isaac, the Arabs through his son Ishmael, which we see in Genesis. So, although Ishmael was not the child of God's special promise, God made a promise to his mom, Hagar. And that was because she was experiencing the harsh hand of the lady of the house, Sarai. So there's a whole story in there, but um, God saw Hagar in her abused state and sinning state and gave her comfort, gave her his presence, and then gave her a promise about what would come for her son. Um, so Ishmael's descendants dwelt in the Arabian Peninsula and became a numerous people, just as God had foretold. Because they had no organized government, the Arab people had little unity before the advent of Islam. Each Arab was loyal to his own tribe, and warfare among the tribes was very frequent. In addition, there were two distinct lifestyles among the people of Arabia. Many of the Arabs traveled through the harsh desert wilderness in independent bands, and these people we call nomadic, and specifically, they were called the Bedouin tribes. And they roamed the desert in search of pasture land and water for their herds of goat and sheep and camels. And over the centuries, the Bedouins' way of life has remained relatively unchanged. And even today, they can be seen traveling from oasis to oasis across the desert land. Now, they have diversified their economy with tourism. So, for instance, back in 2014, which has been a while now, I went and stayed at a Bedouin camp for a night. And then in the next morning, we rode a camel and they had a big breakfast, and you kind of got to see how they live. So, it is kind of interesting that how even in the nomadic lifestyle, they have still diversified their economy. But not all Arabs were desert nomads. Some lived a more settled life on the outer rims of the peninsula, and they established cities along important trade routes or along the coast where rainfall was a bit more abundant than in the middle of the peninsula. And a few of these cities became pretty important trade centers, especially for camel caravans that carried goods across the desert from other lands. And out of one of those cities arose a leader who would unite the people of Arabia. Shortly after the death of the Byzantine Emperor Justinian in 565, Muhammad was born in Arabia. Muhammad claimed to be the last and greatest prophet of Allah, which was their term for God. His teachings became the basis for a new religious movement known as Islam. And Islam means submission to the will of Allah. And his followers are known as Muslims, and Muslims means submitters to Allah. So Muhammad, whose name means highly praised, was born to a poor family in the city of Mecca in Western Arabia. So Mecca is the city that we're starting in. Little is known about his early life except that he was probably orphaned by the age of 6, and then he was raised by a grandfather and uncle. And as a young man, he entered the employment of a wealthy merchant and widow. And then, so like this lady was a merchant and she was a widow. And then at the age of 25, he married her. And for the first time in his life, he enjoyed financial security. And he spent much of his leisure time in a cave near Mecca, meditating on religion and struggling with the polytheism of his people. And during his travels, he had encountered many religions, and so he borrowed from them to form a new religious movement that would govern every aspect of life. So, Muslim historians record that in his 40th year, Muhammad received a vision in which the angel Gabriel gave him a divine revelation to recite. Oops, just a second. Okay, sorry, just checking on something. Um, so So he gets this vision from the angel Gabriel and is given a divine revelation. Sorry, just want to make sure. Um, so this recitation was, this is word for word what it was. It said, recite in the name of your Lord who created man from clots of blood. Recite your Lord is the most bountiful one who by the pen taught man what he did not know. So, according to Muslim teachings, these revelations continued throughout Muhammad's lifetime. Initially, he feared these messages um, because he didn't know where they were coming from. He thought they might be from Satan. However, Muhammad's wife and a trusted friend convinced him that he was actually being the messenger of God. And and so Muhammad then, with their encouragement, began preaching that there was only one God, Allah, and that he was Allah's last prophet. Now, he had pretty little success gaining converts at first. Muhammad's early followers were family members and close friends, and most of the people in Mecca ridiculed him, viewing his teachings as contrary to their religious beliefs and a threat to the city's commercial interests. So Mecca had become a leading trade center, and it was situated at the crossroads of the trade routes in Western Arabia. It also developed into a center of religious worship because the Kaaba was located in Mecca. And that's what you see a picture of right there. This stone building served as a sacred shrine that housed hundreds of idols. People from across Arabia made pilgrimages to this shrine, and then Meccan merchants profited from this pagan worship. So the principal attraction was the famous black stone. That's probably meteorite, is what historians think. And for centuries, Arabs had walked around the Kaaba and kissed the stone as a form of worship. And according to the Muslim tradition, the angel Gabriel sent the stone to Abraham, who, along with his son Ishmael, built the Kaaba and So, rejecting Muhammad's monotheism and fearing it would hinder their profitable business, the leaders of Mecca persecuted Muhammad and his followers. And they were like, "What? This Kaaba's been here for a long time. It has nothing to do with you." So that was also another aspect. So in 622, Muhammad made a historic decision. He and his followers decided to flee, and they moved away from Mecca and they accepted an invitation to move to Medina, which is a city that's about 200 miles north of Mecca. And um, And so at Medina, Muhammad's followers grew rapidly. And the Arabs there not only accepted Muhammad as their spiritual leader, but they made him their political and military leader as well. And once in power, Muhammad, the persecuted, became Muhammad, the persecutor. And while in the minority, he had presented his cause peaceably through preaching, but now he advanced his cause through force and military conquest. And with an army of militant Muslim followers, he slaughtered any who opposed him. And a bitter struggle with the rival city of Mecca came to be. And it wouldn't end until 630 when Muhammad violated a truce and re-entered the city of his birth in triumph. And he destroyed all the idols in the Kaaba except the black stone and turned the Kaaba into a center of Islamic worship. So Mecca became the holy city of a totally new religious system. Now, the heart of Islam is the Quran, which Quran means recitations, and the sacred book is considered the sacred book of the Muslims. So Muslims believe that the archangel Gabriel revealed the word of Allah to Muhammad through these numerous dreams and visions, and that these revelations formed the basis of the teachings. So many of his followers committed his teachings to memories, others wrote them down, but it wasn't until after Muhammad's death that they actually compiled them all together into the Quran. And there's 114 chapters, or what they call surahs, in the Quran. So the central doctrine of the Quran is the belief in one God, Allah, according to, and then Muslims believe that Allah sent more than 100,000 prophets to reveal his will to man. However, Islam reveres Muhammad as the last and the greatest of all of the prophets. And this is Allah's final revelation to people. So the main aspect of the Quran is it talks about there's 5 pillars of Islam. So it also teaches about a paradise in which faithful Muslim men will enjoy gardens of delight and the company of beautiful women. So that's there, it's a very humanistic version of heaven. And to have any hope of entering this paradise, a Muslim must perform certain religious duties. And the Quran teaches Muslims to fear Allah's punishments in these basic religious practices if they are not observed. And these rituals are called the 5 pillars of Islam. So the first one is Shahada, which is the confession. And they say their confession is there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his prophet. Then you have the Salat, which means prayer, and every Muslim must recite prayers up to 5 times a day while facing Mecca. Then you have the Zakat, and that word means purification, and it refers to the alms or money that the devout give to the poor, so charity. Then you have 4, Sa'am, which is a required fast that all Muslims are to observe from sunrise to sunset during the sacred month of Ramadan. And then the Hajj. And the Hajj is a pilgrimage to Mecca. And every Muslim who is physically and financially able to is commended to take at least one trip to Mecca during his lifetime. So by the time of his death in 632, Muhammad had united the Arabian Peninsula under Islam, but he died without having appointed a successor, and this presented a serious problem for Islam and the Arab people, who should succeed Muhammad as the rightful leader of Islam and the emerging state that they were becoming. So the closest friends of Muhammad chose his first four successors from among themselves. These men, that they called caliphs or successors, directed the affairs of Islam, exercising spiritual, political, and military authority. But then, after that, we see a divergence happen between two different branches, the Sunni and the Shia. So initially, the key difference between Sunni and Shia Islam was their belief on who should succeed Muhammad. Sunnis believed that since Muhammad did not appoint a successor, any worthy Muslim could be appointed to lead Islam. And as a result, the caliphate was established. The caliph uh, was the political leader who served as a judge, administrator, and general, but he was not the Muslim's spiritual leader. Now, Shia Muslims believe that Muhammad intended Ali, his son-in-law, to be his successor with authority over political and spiritual matters. And Shia Muslims called their leader Imam rather than Caliph. And so today, Sunnis use the term Imam to refer only to the leader of worship in a mosque, while Shiites claim an unbroken succession of Imams from Ali to the present. So, what initially just started as they had different beliefs on who should lead has now turned into the Sunnis have the majority and they tend to have a nonviolent um, reading of the Quran, and the Shia have become more extreme in their reading of the Quran, and they've become very aggressive in disseminating their religion. So on this map, you can see where the Sunni and Shia are. You can see that the yellow is, sorry, the yellow is Sunni, and it's pretty much international. And the Shia is up in northern Africa and the Middle East. And the darker green it is, the more conservative and Shia it is. And so you can see where the darkest, where the Shia are primarily located. The last thing that we're going to talk about real quick are the Muslim cultural contributions, and then we'll be all set for the day. So, their biggest contribution to the field of medicine, um, now remember, they had studied the Greeks and stuff too. So was a man named Al-Razi, and he's best remembered for his work with smallpox. And then also Ibn Sina, um, and he worked with tuberculosis. So he helped um, come up with scientific solutions for tuberculosis. So they also developed pretty amazing surgical skills as well, like with removing cataracts from eyes and things like that. When it came to literature and math, Omar Khayyam is the name that I want you to remember. He wrote the Arabian Nights as well as a very famous Muslim poem, the Rubaiyat, which is a poem with verses of 4 lines, and it's very picturesque poetry. And then the last thing you should know about is calligraphy. So the most common patterns found in Muslim art are an abstract design of stems and leaves and geometric features. And Muslim artists also excelled in incorporating these abstract representations into calligraphy, which is the art of beautiful writing. And they adorn the walls of their buildings with verses from the Quran written in beautiful calligraphy script. And one of the most honored forms of Islamic art was manuscript illumination. And so Muslim artists use miniature paintings and decorative colors and ornamentation to illustrate or illuminate their books, especially the Quran. And so there we have it. Those are some of their biggest contributions during this era of the 7th century. All right, I'll see you guys next time. Have a great day.